All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Mike and me are switching classes, so he'll have class next week. James chapter 1, you can turn there just for a second. We'll be talking about failing to control the tongue. We've been dealing with the different type of sins, the sins of omission, commission. We're dealing with all that through this Bible class on Sunday mornings. And so we come to one today that is, I think, especially difficult for many of us, and that is controlling the tongue. And so we'll talk about that this morning. But before we get started, let's have a word of prayer. Father God, we thank you for this morning and the ability to come here into this building, Father, to have this time where we can study your word, Father, where we can talk about things that can have major effect on our lives and major effects on the life of other people, Father, the way we use our speech, Father. Help us to be open-minded to this lesson, to look what your word says to us, Father, to be able to examine ourselves carefully, to be the type of people and to be able to speak the way you would have us to speak, Father. Help us to be people who are building up other people, Father, are using our words to encourage and to teach and to help, Father, and not just to break people down, Father, not to cause problems. Father, we know that we're not always the best at this, so we ask that when we do fail you in those ways, Father, that you forgive us of those sins. Father, most of all, we thank you for your Son. We thank you for the great sacrifice that he gave for us, Father, that we can be forgiven of those sins. It's in his name we pray. Amen. All right. When it comes to things in our lives that need healing, there are some things that can heal pretty easily, right? The other day, last year, I was playing soccer. I messed my thumb up, and the other day I'm out there with Jaden, and same thing happened. Kind of similar thing happened. I just kind of got in his way, and he did something, and right away I said, "You broke my finger again, man." And he felt terrible about that. It's just part of it. But you know what's going to happen? That'll heal, and then I'll probably do something stupid, and it'll probably break again. But that'll heal. Years ago when we were in Ada, there was, I've told you all this before, I was putting a new door in, and I was getting a brand new chisel and was putting the hinges, cutting out a part on the edge of the door, and it slipped and went into my hand and hit my thumb bone right there and slid down into, well, that thumb's got a problem, I guess. That's where I messed up this one too. But it slid down in there and went down in there, and there's, the nurse told me that scar would heal and there wouldn't be a scar there. The scar is still there, but overall the injury's fine and it's healed. But there's other things that don't heal the same. Many people carry wounds or scars from maybe words that were spoken even decades ago. Some can still remember something maybe, and usually when it's a word that hurts us, it comes from somebody that we love. Not always, but usually that's what it's like, right? I know there's people who can remember back to something maybe their parents said to them a long time ago that hurt them, or maybe something that a spouse said to them, or maybe it was somebody who embarrassed them publicly or something like that, or maybe it was even something like gossip that was said about the person that damaged their reputation. But the point is that words can cause a lot of injuries. They can cause a lot of problems. And by the way, it can happen in the church too. People can remember maybe a church conflict where some words were said and it caused a whole bunch of problems. The point again being the damage caused by words often lasts longer than many physical injuries. Unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. Now, what I will tell you, especially in the church, is when it comes to the issue of the tongue, listen, a church can survive financial hardship. You know how I know? Because I know it can. I've seen small churches with zero money be effective, right? You can do that. You can make it work. You don't need a building. You don't need a paid preacher. The church can go on, right? You can survive financial problems. You can survive a building disaster if you didn't have a building. You can survive difficult circumstances. But there's a lot of congregations of the Lord's church that they fall apart because of words and the tongue and things that were said. And not just in the church, like we've said, it's families as well. You guys know this. Your families can be fractured. You have friendships that can be broken apart. You have, again, reputation that can be ruined. Marriages have been weakened. Children have been discouraged. Me and Claire were walking yesterday, and it was at the track at Eisenhower, one of the most crazy things I've ever seen. Just to hear the way this dad was talking to his 5 through maybe 8-year-old kids. It was just brutal. It was ridiculous is what it was. And I can just tell you, making these kids cry over the things he was doing was just silly. We remember stuff like that. And so James here says something that we need to remember that we should never forget. Now, he's not saying here that controlling the tongue is an advanced level of Christianity, but I want you to look at James 1:26. It's really interesting to me. James, of course, written to Christians, so written to the church. He says here that the tongue really is a fundamental test of our sincere or genuine religion. James 1 and verse 26 says, "If anyone thinks himself to be religious and yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is worthless." That's kind of you feel like that's kind of an extreme statement there to say that at the end. But again, he's talking to Christians, and he's saying that if you don't know how to control your tongue, there is some level of spiritual maturity to that, but he's saying that your religion, then, it's worthless if you can't control your tongue because of all the danger that the tongue can cause. Those are severe words, and they're important for us to understand because the Bible spends, Old Testament and New, a lot of time talking about the tongue because God knows and needs us to know the incredible power that words possess. When I was in preaching school, the director who's now gone on to his reward, he would tell us all the time, words matter. Words matter. Whether you're talking about positive words, negative words, words matter. So what I want to do this morning is consider what happens when we fail to control the tongue. The first thing we see is understanding here out of James 1 and verse 26 that a failure to control the tongue really reveals a deeper problem, and it's a problem in the heart. One of the easiest mistakes we can make is to say the tongue is the problem itself. That's not the problem, right? The tongue is just kind of the instrument of the problem being passed on to other people, if you will. But Jesus teaches us, if you want to turn to the book of Matthew chapter 12, I want you to see this, Matthew chapter 12 and verse 34, that the tongue it's really not the problem, it's the heart, right? The tongue just reveals a much deeper problem than maybe we think is actually there because it's really underneath the surface. Matthew chapter 12 and verse 34, Jesus says this, "For the mouth speaks out of that which fills the heart." So the things that come out of your mouth are the things that are inside of you, right? And so the tongue is a part of that. And listen, it's not even just the tongue. We could talk about, because of our technology today, texting and social media, email, whatever it is, it can all go the same way. But he's saying here is these words that come out of us, they do not appear randomly out of nowhere. You've heard where there's smoke, there's fire. That's true, right? The tongue just shows that there is a fire underneath. And so words are not random. They are not disconnected from the person speaking them. It's just that our words are revealing about us what's actually going on underneath. And it's like that with a lot of stuff, right? But let's say a person who has angry speech, right? We know people like that. The first accounting job I had was working, you've heard this story before to some degree, the boss, the guy was a family business, and the guy, that was going on in his heart, anger and greed, and you could hear it in the way he spoke, and the way he spoke to not really just me and us and the rest of the workers, but to his family that worked there. It was pretty hard to listen to at times, but it told me that there's a lot going on. It wasn't just random words, there was something going on deep down underneath. So if you're a person who's speaking angry words all the time, that tells me you've got an anger problem in the heart. Or if there's a gossip that's coming out of your mouth, there's something in the heart, whatever it is, that is feeding the desire to want to speak about other people when really there's no need to do that. Or maybe you're somebody who has a problem with critiquing people all the time. If that's there, that the chances are that there's pride or bitterness or jealousy or some kind of resentment that is, again, not from the tongue, but something that's deep down inside of you, right? It's an attitude or a characteristic that needs to change. But even on the positive side of this, right, if you're somebody who encourages people, that tells me that you are worried and concerned about other people and people being lifted up. That's good. If you speak words of grace, which is what our words should be, they tell me that you understand God's grace, because to understand God's grace is to live with a thankful heart, a sincere heart that is thankful for the forgiveness you have. And so you speak words like that to other people because you want them to have the same thing. And so the tongue, when you think about it, really, it's a window, right? If you could look into a person's soul, into their spirit and who they are, the words that are coming out of their mouth, that's the window into their soul, right? So you're able to see who they are just from simply the things that they say. And again, text, whatever, that is all part of this too. That's why James does not merely tell us to watch our words. He says a person who refuses to bridle his tongue is deceiving himself. Now, I think that word deceiving is pretty important because, again, the individual James describes in chapter 1 and verse 26 thinks he is a religious person, would tell you that he's a religious person, believes he is, I think, spiritually healthy and doing spiritually fine. He believes things are well between him and God, right? But his speech is telling everybody something very different. The frightening reality is that a person can we can fool ourselves. We absolutely can. We can fool ourselves into thinking that nothing is wrong. We can fool ourselves into thinking that, oh, it's just not a big deal in my life, and nothing is, I got that thing going on. I can't control my tongue very well, but everything else I do pretty good, and so things are fine. Our speeches can absolutely, the things we say can reveal a heart that has not been fully surrendered to God. So sometimes when you're thinking about this, the clearest picture of our spiritual condition is not found in what we do during worship. All that stuff matters, obviously, but a lot of times it's really just what we say during the week. When you're having those conversations with anybody you meet. We had some of our LDS friends show up on our porch step yesterday, and you guys know how they do things, and they showed up, and I like having conversations. I actually, right when they showed up, Hanley had called me, so I went to, by the way, Hanley is in the hospital. I'll tell you about that later. It's heart stuff he's got going on. But Hanley had called me, and these people show up on the doorstep, and so I said, I'm pointing at Claire as our dog's about to attack them. So Claire goes out there and talks to them a little bit. And after finally I get off the phone, I'm thankful that they're still there because I love conversations like that. I got nothing else to do on a Saturday. So I go out there and I talk to them. And even, they send out the younger people usually, right? And they're sending out 3 now, which is a little unusual. But they've got an older guy in the back, and by older, I mean he's probably in his mid-20s. And the other 2 guys are very, very young. And I can just tell you, by the way those younger guys spoke, that they had some issues as far as being able to speak in a way that people weren't even going to listen to them because it was not good. And the words they would say, even just I would never bring up on somebody's doorstep if I'm trying to have a study with somebody at all. They're definitely struggling. And so when we think about our spiritual condition and maybe thinking we're doing just fine religiously speaking, maybe we need to check our speech to make sure that that's actually true. How do we speak when someone disagrees with us? That was a good example of that yesterday. It's when somebody disagrees with you, you can be pretty harsh about stuff, right? You absolutely can. Yesterday I was bringing up the Bible to this guy, and right away he goes to other places, not trying to get into that, but it's a good example. And he just had an attitude and was angry about stuff. I just literally sat down on my step, or the swing out on my front porch, and just talked to the guy as kindly as I could. But his attitude, one of them specifically, one of the guys was pretty wise in the fact that he wouldn't say much, but the other guy was talking a lot, and I could tell you he would just disagreeing with him, it made him mad. It did. And you could see in the way he was talking to me, as I was talking very, very calm, that he couldn't handle that very well. But it's like that with us sometimes, right? When people disagree with us, it can be really easy for us to kind of talk in a negative way towards them, even if it's just our tone. How do we speak when we're frustrated? How do we speak when we're hurt? How do we speak about people who aren't present? I think that says something about who we are too. It's not something we really should be doing in a negative way at all. How do we speak to our spouses? How do we speak to our children? How do we speak to our coworkers? How do we speak when we think that, nobody important necessarily is listening, right? Or why are those words coming out of our mouths? And those are the type of moments that if you want a good window into your soul to see how religious or Christian you are, there's a good example, right? Go look at that. Go look at the word you're speaking, because if you can't control your tongue, James 1:26 tells me your religion is worthless. So your Christianity is worthless. So make sure you're taking care of that. It tells me that really the true condition of the heart can be exposed really, really quickly, can't it? A person can remain calm and spiritual on the outside and maybe even peaceful until something doesn't go their way and their tone and their words change completely. A person may seem like a very patient person until maybe they're criticized. By the way, with criticism in this world, one of the things I learned about preaching is you've got to be able to handle criticism. And maybe the best advice for any of us when we're dealing with criticism in our lives is just to initially, whether you think it's true or not, just to hear the criticism out and then go back and examine it. You don't need to respond in a negative way. If it's a negative criticism and it's untrue, then guess what? You know it's untrue, and that's okay. And go away, just be okay with that when you examine it. But sometimes critique is real. And so you can examine that to see if that's something you need to do. Don't automatically respond like we like to do when we're criticized. We kind of snap back because we don't like to be judged in those negative ways. Sometimes when we see people and think that there's something happens to them, and then these words come out that surprise all of us. But Jesus tells us that these words don't just suddenly appear, right? They don't just come out randomly. They're actually there in the heart already. You kind of imagine carrying a bucket that's filled to the top with water. If you're doing that and somebody bumps into you, what's going to spill out of that bucket? Water? Why? Water's in the bucket. That's what's going to happen. It's no different with anything. With the words, it's the same thing. It's what's inside. You can use that bucket example for anything. If it contained oil and somebody bumped into me while I'm containing a bucket of oil, what's going to dump out? It's not going to be water. It's going to be oil, because oil is what's inside. And listen, life has a way of bumping into us. And so whatever is there overflowing in your heart, you're going to get bumped into. Life is going to do that. And when that happens, what's going to come out is whatever is full inside of you. Criticism, stress, disappointment, conflict, those things are going to run into you. And when they run into you, what's going to spill out? I love diagnostic tools for vehicles. Peter will be here in a little bit probably, but he really kind of showed me how to use those. And they're good if you know how to use them right, because they can tell you a bunch. I've used them on Sharon's car. They can tell you a lot about what's happening and what's not happening underneath. Sharon, I think the last time she had a problem out here is like, the first thing I did was, let's turn the car on and do what? Let's pull up the hood. Let's see what's going on underneath, because what you hear and what's going on the outside, it may even sound, she's like, the check engine light came on. Let's go check it out. So we did. You have to kind of do a deep dive sometimes to really see what's happening. It can appear very fine on the outside. Well, the tongue is that, right? The tongue is a diagnostic tool for us. It shows us things about our hearts that maybe we might otherwise ignore. If you get a check engine light on in your car, hopefully you're not like a lot of us are, where we just kind of, it sounds fine, everything's perfect, I'm just going to drive it for a while and then maybe something will happen, right? No, you need to make sure that you can check to make sure something is going on. And so maybe you said something and you ask yourself, how can I stop saying things like that? How can I stop critiquing people? How can I stop being gossipy? How can I stop, insert this sin of the speech right here? Instead of just addressing that speech, you need to address the source, right? Because the source is the heart. And that's where James begins here. Now, before we talk about the damage that words can cause, we have to understand that uncontrolled speech is often really exposing a deeper spiritual problem that needs attention. Point number 2. Failing to control the tongue can cause enormous damage. And really, this is why James brings this up. It's not just because it doesn't just, he's like, hey, just control your tongue. There's a reason for that, right? It can cause, look at James 3, 5, and 6. It can cause a lot of damage. If you wonder why the tongue is, the fire's coming out here, is because he describes it like that. The tongue is a little thing. And there's different examples. We don't have time to get all into them in James chapter 3 especially. But it talks about the fact that the tongue is small. But the tongue, though it be small, it can cause tremendous damage. In James chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, it says this. You can go back and look before there. It talks about ships as well and driven by the small rudder. And it's where the pilot desires, right? Same thing with the tongue. It's what you desire to do. It says, so also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire, and the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body and sets on fire the course of our life and is set on fire by hell. And so after showing us that our speech is really the condition of our heart, he talks about the fact here that the tongue has tremendous power. And I like the example here of kind of like a forest fire being spread, right? Really what he's saying is there's this kind of like a small spark that happens. And here in Oklahoma, especially further west you get in Oklahoma, I don't know how many fires have been started by people throwing a cigarette or something out, right? It's just a small little thing, but that small little spark, that small little fire, if you will, can cause immense damage. There's a lot of power in that, even though maybe a small spark can seem pretty harmless at times, right? If a small spark by itself sometimes in the wrong condition, maybe it's not going to cause a problem, but in the right condition, it's going to start a forest fire. James says the tongue is like that. Most people don't wake up one morning and they say, you know what I'm going to do today with my mouth and my words? I'm going to destroy a friendship today. Or maybe they do. I hope they don't. Or I'm going to destroy my marriage, or I'm going to destroy a congregation of the Lord's church, or my marriage, or whatever it is. Or I'm just going to crush another person's spirit because I'm hurting. A lot of times you heard that hurting people hurt people. That's a big part of that, and that's definitely true. James says the tongue is like that. It begins often with maybe something like a very small comment, a careless remark, or just a tiny piece of gossip that you think is not really that big a deal, but you say it anyway. Or it could be an angry response or a criticism, whatever it is. But those words that we speak have a way of traveling, by the way, much further than you ever think they're going to travel. I've heard things that have been said about me before in different contexts. They get back to me. And I try to put that out of my mind because I got other things to worry about. But it happens, right? Words are going to come back. They do. They listen. You reap what you sow, friends. It's just the way it's going to work in this life. And those words are eventually going to come back, and it hurts when that happens. Our words can travel much further than we intended. If you don't want something to come back to you, you probably should not say it because it's going to. Eventually, it will. Maybe it's because a person repeats something that they heard. And then maybe guess what happens with that? Maybe somebody adds a little something to that story, and it just can do so much damage. What I've noticed with gossip especially is, and that's really kind of I think the hardest one to deal with it a lot of times, is somebody says something and then something else gets said to somebody else, and then assumptions start being added to the story, and things that aren't facts are not a part of it anymore, and then eventually it comes back around. Feelings have gotten hurt, and relationships have gotten destroyed, and trust, if you see the things that put up on there, trust, love, respect, those type of things can just be destroyed from words that we say, right, from our tongue. And because of this, relationships suffer. And eventually, before long, there's a tremendous damage that sometimes can't really be undone. There's other sins where if you steal something from somebody, the Bible had a way in the Old Testament of you could pay it back, right? There's restitution to be made. There are some sins that you can do that with, right? That you can kind of fix it, if you will. But with words, once a word is spoken, it's out there. And as hard as you can, they can be forgiven, but there's going to be, and there's all consequence with any sin. But with words, I'm telling you, words that I have heard said about me or said to me or whatever that were negative, they're still with me. I don't dwell on them, but they're still there. And when I see those people, sometimes I think of those things that were said. And so those are there, even though maybe that relationship has been fixed. You can apologize for words, yes. You can seek forgiveness for them, and you can be forgiven for them. But you cannot make people unhear something. Once they've heard it, they've heard it. It's the same thing with seeing something. There's one reason Scripture repeatedly warns us about the danger of speech. And it says in Proverbs 18, verse 21, you may write this down. Proverbs 18 and verse 21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. And James also talks about this, the fact that we bless people and curse people with the same tongue, right? You can do both things. There's a great power both ways. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Again, most of us agree, I think, that words can certainly hurt people, but Solomon goes even further. He says the tongue has power, both death and life, which means it can kill things. I'm not talking about physically killing you, but it can kill stuff. It can kill relationships. It can kill trust. It can kill love at times. Words can do that. And unfortunately, we maybe don't think about it like that. And with the verbal, the vocal, the speaking sins, and we don't have to get into time to get into all the different ones. You guys have heard me say this before. You've heard others say this, and you know this to be true. This is hard for us because it's easy just to start talking. It's easy. And I think above a lot of things, there's a lot of things that, listen, I don't have to, there's a lot of things in my life that I am not tempted towards. A lot of us can say there's a lot of things that I'm never going to have an issue with this. Never say never, but you have a pretty good gauge on those things. But like with words, all of us can struggle with words at times. And it's because it's just so easy. Maybe it's a pride thing where we want people to know what we know, or we want people to have know our opinion, or just whatever. We just let words come out. Kids, you know that, right? I said before, little kids can say, I love you, long before they ever know what that means. Words can just come out. And unfortunately, that can cause the problems with all this. By the way, if you want to get context of James, in James chapter 3 especially, it talks about the fact at the beginning there that not many should become teachers. And the reason is because we have a problem with the tongue. We have a problem controlling the tongue. Whether it's through, teaching something false or our own opinion or whatever, just generally speaking, people have a problem with the tongue. Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 9 says, with his mouth, the godless man destroys his neighbor. So, ultimately, over time, you are trying to win people around you. And if you're destroying relationships with words, you're not going to win those people. You're not really going to have a chance to do that. In fact, a reputation may take years and years to build and just a couple words to damage. We've been really good to have good neighbors where we're at, and we have one family particularly that we love them. They're great people, and I would hate for something to be said to them to damage that relationship that we've had with them, because I think over time you never know with people. But I think that sometimes we take so much time to build those relationships, and then we just let our pride or emotions get the better of ourselves, and we destroy those reputations that we have with those people. Proverbs 16 and verse 28 says, a perverse man spreads strife, and a slanderer separates intimate friends. And so not only can it destroy reputations, but it can destroy relationships. One conversation, one accusation. The neighbors, that's the same neighbors. They have their son he mows. He has a mowing business, and for a long time, those guys, we have that this problem with a lot of stuff in town where. Where does our land end at, right? And so what those guys will do on that side of their land, they'll mow up to a sidewalk over there, which is in our yard, which I'm glad that they're doing that. But for a long time, they would leave just chunks and chunks of grass everywhere. I bag everything I mow. I never said anything because to me, it's it's not that big of a deal. I don't need to make a big deal about something like that. When really, why? It looks selfish and looks just it's irrelevant in the long run for a spiritual thing, right? So for an eternal destination for that person, why would I go complain about grass in my yard when I can have my mower or my kids go pick it up? Or let them do it eventually because they'll see it, they'll do it. I know those people. Stuff like that. If you bring stuff like that up, you can cause problems and affect maybe the eternal destiny of some people. It can absolutely destroy congregational unity. I think maybe one of the greatest dangers to the church, facing the church, is this. Some congregations are destroyed by false doctrine. That happens. It's not a big deal anymore. It does happen for sure, but it does happen. Many are weakened by gossip and slander and suspicion and constant negativity. And listen, the truth of the matter is we can be completely sound in doctrine. By sound, that word simply just means healthy if you don't know what it means. Sound doctrine means healthy doctrine. You can have all the doctrine right, and you can be a congregation. By the way, it just takes one individual to destroy that. But you can have a congregation of people that are speaking in a way that they can't control their tongue, and ultimately it's going to hurt the church in a major way, in a negative way. Even if you have all the doctrine stuff right, you have to have the Spirit of Christ and the doctrine of Christ side by side, right? That needs to be who we are. Think about how many New Testament commands deal with how Christians speak to each other. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31, one of the verses I assigned to this lesson, says, "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you." Get those out of your life, especially if you're a member of the Lord's church. Those should not be a part of you. God knows if those things are left unchecked, if you don't deal with those, it's going to spread. And if it spreads inside the church, there's no doubt that unity is going to suffer. Now, like I've already mentioned, also it can destroy future opportunities. There are people who no longer trust someone's judgment because of something like maybe a careless word that has been spoken. We got to move on here. We don't have much time to get through all this stuff. Failing to control the tongue hurts people we're supposed to help. And that may be the biggest part of this lesson, right, to me, because I know my words can affect me. They certainly can. But I would hate for it to be said about me in the day of judgment that I hurt other people and caused eternal problems for other people because of the things that I said. Ephesians 4:29, going back a couple of verses before 31, it says, "Let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification." Did you get that there? It says only that. So the unwholesome stuff should not even be something that's happening at all. You're not going to be perfect in this, but it shouldn't be part of who you are. Only such a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moment, so that it will give grace to those who hear. In that moment when you're about to say that thing that you're going to say, measure it by those words. Is this going to help in the moment? Is this going to give grace in the moment, or is this unwholesome? Is it going to go in the opposite direction? One of the reasons God takes speech so seriously is because people matter to Him. People matter to God. And so what you says, again, imagine this, especially about the church. If you talk bad about my wife, we're going to have a problem. If you're talking bad about His bride, He's going to have a problem with that. A big problem with that. You should not talk like that about His bride. And so be very, very careful when you're saying anything about the bride of Christ or really to anybody else, because God cares about people. Every person we speak to, whether it's in the church or out of the church, is carrying a burden that you don't know about. I promise you, everybody's carrying a burden of some kind. The problem is, are you going to be making that, the question is, not a problem, the question is, are you making that harder for them, or are you making that easier for them? Every person that we speak to has struggles and fears and disappointments and wounds caused by other things. Are you helping them? So when you look at Ephesians 4:29, it's not simply saying, by the way, don't say bad things. It's saying, don't say bad things, no unwholesome word, but also on top of that, you need to build up. You need to have a purpose with your speech, not these careless words. It needs to meet a need, means it needs to help somebody in some way, and it should give them grace or show them grace in some way. God intends for our words to be a blessing, not a curse to the people around us. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18. It says, "There is one who speaks rashly like the thrust of a sword." So you when somebody's in a battle, they're just trying to get you, right? They're just thrashing that sword around. They're just swinging it around. And what does it do? It hurts you. It leaves scars. It leaves mortal wounds at times. But it says there, the tongue of the wise brings healing. I don't know how many of you have somebody in your life that can speak words of wisdom to you, but I'm thankful for the ones that I have. Because those are the best people to have around you. It's people that are going to speak wisdom to you, and it's going to be truthful stuff every time, and they're going to help you, right? They don't leave wounds in you. I don't like to have a conversation with somebody and walk away feeling like I've got a wound now. Like it's hurt me instead of helped me in some way. I want somebody to be able to lift me up and to help me. And like we talked about before, give me grace and something to use in the speech, right, to be helpful to me, to encourage me in some way. And again, it's just that powerful image of a sword there leaves a wound. I shouldn't walk away from a conversation with a wound. And like we all know, sometimes the people that we wound are the people that are the closest to us. It's the familiarity breeds contempt stuff, right? It's the way it goes, right? We feel maybe more comfortable saying something like that to somebody that we know. I don't know why it's like that, but we do. I think most of us probably, hopefully, I think it's kind of the way it is, we tend to be more careful in our speech with strangers than with our family. Maybe even with a visitor than our spouses. Maybe we talk to our spouses in a way that we absolutely should not. Maybe we're more careful with our coworkers than we are our children. And listen, that's a double-minded man, right? We need to be, that's the word integrity. Have a heart of integrity to where I am speaking to my children the same way I'm going to speak to my neighbor, the same way I'm going to speak to my coworker, the same way I'm speaking to anybody. That is my purpose that I have, is to build them up. No unwholesome words, but to help those people. I mean, if I ask anybody in here, hey, listen, what do you need? Do you need encouragement or discouragement? Nobody here should say discouragement, right? We all want to be encouraged in some way. It's not helpful for me to be discouraged. Now, I can be discouraged by truth without somebody being discouraging. That can actually happen. But if somebody comes up and their words are going to be just straight discouraging, should not be said about us. Again, go back in Scripture and think about how many people need encouragement. Did Joshua need encouragement? Yes, he did. Joshua was taking over for a very well-respected leader. It took the people a long time to respect him like they should have, but they did. And Moses, Joshua was going to take over, right? And it was going to be a big thing for him. And how often was it talked about with courage with him, right? He needed courage. By the way, encouragement literally means, somebody explained to me like this, to inject somebody with courage. I love that. So I'm going to give them courage to face whatever problem they have, right? I'm injecting them with courage, to be encouraged. New Testament, Timothy. Paul had to encourage him. Timothy needed to be encouraged by the things that were being said to him. The church needs encouragement. The Christians today, we all need to be encouraged and not discouraged. And the reason is because life is difficult. And we face stuff. And then, you're going through all this stuff in your life, and life itself, like I said, has a way of bumping into you anyway. And then along comes somebody and they say a word to you that just makes it worse. That should not be happening. Especially, listen, the world can do that to us. We should maybe expect it more from the world. But it should not happen with Christian among Christian ever. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11 says this: "Therefore encourage one another and build up one another, just as you also are doing." So God's expectation for Christians to be builders or breaker-downers? Builders. All right, that's what we should be doing. That should be our focus with everybody in this building, everybody we know, a member of the church, with anybody in general, but especially with the household of God. What do builders do? Builders, they strengthen, they support, they take time, they take effort to do what needs to be done to make something stand. But if you have an uncontrolled tongue, it does the opposite of that. Again, one reason speech is so dangerous, because emotional wounds are invisible, right? You don't see them on people. If I, got the scar on my hand, you can see where I was cut into by that chisel. But when it comes to words, you can't see the damage that words cause outwardly necessarily. You can see people crying, of course, but you don't see the damage, the pain necessarily. And a lot of people that are hurt by words especially, they are smiling at you the whole time that they're carrying that hurt. Because they're trying the best they can to get through that. They may be attending worship and doing all these things, and maybe there's that hurt that's still deep down underneath. That damage is still there, and some people say, well, they just need to get over it. It doesn't work like that, friends. You don't just get over things like that. Words affect people differently. Because I'm a preacher and I get used to words being spoken at me or about me, they affect me for sure, but I think maybe it happens so much with me at times that it doesn't affect me that much anymore, as far as letting it bother me and let my mind to dwell on those things. It's not, but there's a lot of people who can't handle it at all. And it's harder for them, and it takes years and years and years and years, and maybe they never get over it at all. And so maybe what seems small to us that I'm speaking outside, it's like a knockout blow to somebody. It's like an uppercut to somebody that leaves a mark on them forever. Now, that doesn't mean that people should be overly sensitive. I'm not saying that. But it does mean that we should be thoughtful about anything that we say. But again, that's all the negative. There is some positive to this. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 18, like we've already mentioned, the reckless tongue wounds like a sword, but it says the wise tongue brings healing. Think about the impact of a positive word. It can change a year for somebody. It can change a life for somebody, by the way. But, maybe more closely, a compliment, a note of appreciation, a word of comfort, some gratitude that's spoken to you, it can turn a day around completely. You could be having the worst day, and then something is said to you. Maybe it's a reminder of God's promises to you. Those are super helpful to have when you're having tough times. And just like we can remember those words that were said to us in a negative way for years, we can also remember the times when we were hurting or something of that nature, we're having a tough time, and somebody came in and they spoke some words to us that had such a positive impact on us. And that sticks with you too. And those are the kind of people that you tend to have those long relationships with in life, because there's those type of people you want around you. That's what Paul's talking about in chapter 4, verse 29 of Ephesians, right? Words that build up, words that meet a need, words that give grace. Let's move on right here. We've already talked about this. We've only got like 8 minutes left. Failing to control the tongue damages the unity of the church. I think one of Satan's most effective weapons against the church is this, right? Division from within caused by using the tongue and words sinfully. I'm just saying sometimes things can be said that are not sinful that can still cause problems, but when you're using it in a sinful way, in a non-good biblical way, throughout the New Testament, God emphasizes the importance of unity among His people. John chapter 17, among the greatest of all the things you're going to read, Jesus in that prayer to the Father, when He talks about unity, and He wants unity to be a sign of His people, right? A stamp mark on the people that my people are unified, like He says, like you, Father, you and me are unified, right? We're together in the same way. We're unified in the same way. He wants the church to be the same. He wants us to be completely unified. And if Jesus prayed for that type of unity, the apostles taught that kind of unity, we need to work like the early church did to preserve it. It's tough. Ephesians chapter 4 deals with the doctrine there, the 7 parts of the doctrine there, all the ones that are mentioned there. But before that, it talks about all the attitude and characteristics we need to have to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, right? That means there's effort involved in this. And so you think, well, I just have a problem with my speaking, and if it hurts the church, I hope it doesn't do that, but maybe it does. You got to make an effort, friend. This is about preserving a sacred thing. There are a few things that threaten unity more quickly than an uncontrolled tongue. We've all seen it. It happens. A criticism is repeated, an assumption is made, a rumor begins, whatever it is, and all of a sudden you have a church that is divided right down the middle. Sides begin to form, as they just naturally are going to do, and before long what's going to happen is people who should be working together and focus on saving the lost and building each other up are pulling apart from each other. They're dividing from each other. The frightening thing is that many of these situations begin with words, again, I think that just initially in our minds, and maybe this is a big part of this lesson too, that just seem insignificant to us. I appreciate people that are willing to be quiet more than they are willing to talk, because that tells me a couple of things. It tells me, number one, they're listening more, which we need to be better at that. That's something we struggle with. But it also tells me they're measuring what they say. I get up here and I don't know how many words. I think I did a transcription one time. Like on a 35-minute sermon up here, I speak roughly 4,000. I talk fast, so 4,000 to 5,000 words at times. If you think about how much that happens a year, that means at least 10,000 times in 2 sermons for 40,000 times. 500,000 words I'm speaking on Sundays here. That's without the classes, right? That's a lot of words. And if you're just talking about regular speech throughout the day, most people say typically more than that if you're, around people at all. And so, but we think that these words really, we just speak and it's fine and nothing big. And, oh yeah, I say a bunch of stuff, but maybe one little thing, it's not that big a deal. But the one little thing can cause all these problems. James 3:9-10 says this, like I mentioned earlier, about the tongue. With it we bless our Lord and Father, so we do good with it. But he says also with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. Back to what we talked about before. From the same mouth come both blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be this way. So he's pointing out this pretty troubling inconsistency amongst Christians. We're praising God on Sunday, and then maybe during the week we tear people down. Crazy. God is not glorified by that. God does not want that from us, as he says right there. Proverbs 6:16-19, by the way, among those things that God hates there, it says, or a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife amongst brothers. Again, the church is purchased with the blood of Christ. Make sure you're doing your best to make that be what it needs to be. Moving on here, we got to move really quickly, only a few minutes left. Failing to control the tongue reflects a failure of spiritual maturity. In James chapter 3, again, going back to the context there in verse number 2, he says, for we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body as well. Saying then again that the tongue is hard to control, right? This is one of the hardest things that we struggle with. But he's saying here, when we talk about the word perfect, he's referring to somebody who is mature, right? Spiritually speaking, there's maturity there. He's not teaching sinless perfection. He's saying the one that can do good at controlling the tongue, there's spiritual maturity with those people because, again, it takes effort and discipline. He says we all stumble in many ways. By the way, he says we. Do you notice that? We? That says that he struggled with this. This is the Lord's brother, by the way. Struggled with tongue issues. He wasn't going to lie about that. He's not deceiving himself. He's telling truth, isn't he? He's like, I struggle with this too. That's what he said here. So there's comfort in that, right? That tells us that we all struggle with this, but we also have to make sure that we are not saying, well, we all struggle and it's just the way it's going to be, and then it is what it is, right? He's bringing all this up because we need to work on it. We need to do the best we can to control it. Think about it in many ways. The tongue, you've seen dominoes that fall, and there's always one at the very end, right? It's the same thing with words, right? The tongue often is at the very end of that, right? All these things are going on in our life and our heart, and eventually it comes out the mouth. Just like that last domino that falls. Now, unfortunately, many people assume maturity means always having something to say. Like we've already mentioned, Proverbs 10, verse 19, you might write that one down. It says, when there are many words, transgression is unavoidable. Meaning, if you just like to talk, you're going to say something that you shouldn't say. Many words, transgression, it's going to happen. But he who restrains his lips is wise. Not every opinion, not every criticism, not every argument needs to be said, won, spoken. Any of that stuff needs to happen. It doesn't need to happen. One of the marks of maturity is learning the difference in what can be said and what should be said. I have the power, that's meekness, right? Christ and all had the power to do whatever he wanted to. Meekness, sorry, I'm talking about meekness, right? Gentleness, self-control. I have the power to tear you down. In the same way, I have the power to build you up. I can do either one of those things. I want to. What is it that I am choosing to do? Maybe ask yourself these questions when you speak as we close here. Is it necessary? Because it's not always necessary. Is it helpful? Is this the right time? Because again, there's some things you can say that can be necessary, that can be helpful, but the time may not be right. There's sometimes a right place and a right time. Will this honor God? Will this help the situation? You see, mature Christians learn to ask those questions before they speak here. There's kind of a list of things there. An uncontrolled tongue reveals heart problems. It causes enormous damage. It hurts people we're supposed to help. It damages the unity of the church, and it often shows our spiritual maturity, things that we lack in. That's where we're going to stop at for today. Thank you, guys.